this will get on YouTube, if the communist Chinese will allow it to get on YouTube, please tell any students watching what President Clinton and you put together in 2000 in the Oslo Accords. You gave the Palestinians a pathway to peace, and they were scared to take it because they knew they would be slaughtered by Hamas.
Wow, I don't know where to start, Joe, but you
go ahead.
Yeah, okay.
I need help.
Well, I want to make a couple of quick points because you raised, things that, need to be vented about. First of all, I have had many conversations, as you have had, with a lot of young people over the last many months now. And you're right. They don't know very much at all about the history of the Middle East or, frankly, about history in many areas of the world, including in our own country.
All right. I'm Ben Burgess. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined, as always, by our oh, shit. Where's Jake? Oh, no. No. Jake Appett, our producer, is... doing, he's graduating from his MFA program. He's got a bunch of stuff related to that, that he has to do tonight. We're all very proud of him.
And MFA stands for Motherfucker Anonymous, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's a whole program. Like he's been,
yes.
He's been working the steps for the last 2 years. So we're very proud of Jake. But I am joined by our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. I am also joined by the great R.M. Brown. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me. Always good to talk to you. Always look forward to talking to you.
So that clip that we just watched, Hillary Clinton on Morning Joe, I should say that when we were trying to figure out a cold open, there's a reason we didn't start at the beginning of the question, because before what we started playing, there's like 2 more minutes of Joe Scarborough ranting about the kids and, how crazy they all are. And, oh my God, they call the president Genocide Joe. And there was something that somebody wanted to name after Madeleine Albright, but people object to it because they say she's a war criminal. And can you believe that? He just goes on and on and on. Communist China influencing the children via TikTok comes up a lot. It's honestly indistinguishable from like the Fox News version of this. But what I particularly liked about that clip is that here you have Joe Scarborough very confidently repeating this narrative about how Bill Clinton, Big Dog, tried to solve Israel-Palestine. He gave the Palestinians the super generous offer, and Arafat turned him down, and it's all the Palestinians' fault. And he's just like, can you believe that these stupid kids do not know this? And it's kind of amazing because I saw, I think the Zeh Squirrel account on Twitter posted this. There's this amazing old clip of Joe Scarborough's late father-in-law, Zeg Brzezinski, on Morning Joe, as Joe makes exactly this same claim.
What do we do the next time Israel is attacked from an outside force? What do we do at that point?
That's the wrong question.
No, that's not the wrong question, because we never get the condemnation of Hamas or Hezbollah. It's always after Israel responds to defending itself.
No, it's not. The problem is that this conflict has lasted for years, and the United States has been largely passive. So the right question is not what do we do when things break down. The right question is what do we do to avoid a breakdown by being engaged seriously in the peace process. And for the last 8 years, we haven't been. And that's why we have the mess like we have right now in our hands.
You can't blame what is happening in Israel right now on the Bush administration.
Yes, you can.
No, you can't.
Well, look, Joe.
Let's go back to 2000, Dr. Brzezinski. You and I both know Bill Clinton gave Arafat and the Palestinians everything they could have wanted.
Such a stunningly superficial knowledge of what went on that it's almost embarrassing to listen to you.
Oh, is it?
If you were to look more closely at what happened in the Clinton Camp David discussions, you would know that what you have just said is absolutely wrong. There were all sorts of provisions and catches to the so-called proposal, and it wasn't rejected. The negotiations went on in Taba, and then there were elections in Israel, and Sharon came in, and everything got aborted. In the last 8 years, we had a policy in which we have proclaimed an interest in peace. Condi Rice has traveled 16 times in 21 months to the region, proclaiming, you must do this, you must do that. But the United States never exerted itself. So the issue that Obama faces, and that's a question that you raised, is, are we going to be sitting there issuing condemnations, whether it's of Hamas or of Israel or anybody else, or are we going to be seriously engaged in the peace process? That is the question.
We have another block, and I'm very excited about that because I'm stunningly superficial. Chief, I look forward to you educating me and the rest of America. Hold on, the rest of America and the rest of the foreign policy community who have said time and again, Arafat walked away from the best deal he could have got, and that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
You're repeating slogans. You're repeating slogans. He did not walk away. What he said was, I'm going to take the proposal to all of the Arab capitals and see how they react, because the proposals were controversial. And then negotiations went on, even after Christmas, where Clinton and Arafat met, and they were going on in Taba in January, after Clinton was already leaving office, and then the process got aborted. It's helpful to know a little bit about it.
It's very exciting, Chief, that you know things that the rest of the international community doesn't know.
You're going to judge your knowledge by the sort of collective standards of 300 million people. Then don't be surprised that you're embarrassed.
I'm not embarrassed. I read the New York Times and the Washington Post and Foreign Affairs. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw those away, and anytime I have a question, I'm going to call you up.
Let me spell it to you. TABA, Taba negotiations. Look them up. It will be helpful.
I'll do that.
It's amazing.
You might think that I guess they weren't engaged yet. So your then girlfriend's dad, who used to be the United States National Security Advisor, it's like a career diplomat, saying that something you're confidently asserting is stunningly superficial and that you have no idea what you're talking about. You'd think that would be the kind of thing that would lodge in your brain, and you would then not say that same thing again. But yeah, you'd be wrong. Look, he knows. He reads the New York Times. He reads the Washington Post.
Yeah, you know, the funny thing is before the episode, I was actually just kind of reading up why the Oslo Accords failed from Foreign Policy magazine. And you know, which Morning Joe just said he reads. So maybe he should work better on his reading.
I like the when he's like, it's embarrassing. What you're saying is I'm embarrassed. That's a burn right there.
Yeah.
You've made everyone dumber with what you've just said.
Yeah, as Tom says in the chat, I will not defer to my future half-wit son-in-law.
What's the lady's name? Misha? It's Misha, right?
I think Mika.
Mika.
I think it's Mika.
Mika.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I don't ask you how to pronounce his full first name because
Mika, you can't do better. This
I just call him General Brzezinski.
So embarrassing.
Gets me by.
My son-in-law, he's pure embarrassment, making me look bad.
Yeah. Well, speaking of things that look bad, we also, we also have Bill Maher, who has some opinions about the anti-war encampments at universities. And he's here in discussion with somebody who who's also named Bill and who's also a comedian, but who I like about 10,000 times more than I like Bill Maher.
Oh yeah, easy. That's an easy one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of the Bills, I think we know who's the better Bill right there.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, that's like really out of the Bills I can think of in general, but certainly the comedian Bills. This is, gotta go Burr every time. But yeah, they're discussing various things, but they're about to get to the encampments.
Headliner.
I could see you not having a good time in Boston. I could see them going.
That was a long time ago.
Dude, you have. This is a hacky reference, but you totally have the energy of you forgot to give out the homework assignment, Mrs. So and so.
Boston, you may have heard, is a college town. There's quite a few intellectuals there. The audience that's very sophisticated, they like my show. Okay, we all have our niche.
Oh God, you're so fucking highbrow.
I mean, we haven't even gotten to the part I wanted to talk about yet, but I really love this exchange we just watched.
Yeah, the whole like hour and a half is just Bill Burr just needling Bill Maher just like that. So if you've never wanted to watch an episode and you're enjoying this right now, just watch the whole thing. You'll have a great time.
You know what? I talked about this on my channel too, but I watched his entire Jerry Seinfeld interview.
Oh, yeah.
And this is kind of like Bill Maher's show now, is just he invites people on and they're annoyed by him the whole time. Because that's exactly what Jerry Seinfeld was doing too. Bill Maher kept bringing out all this old like crap, like all this old like, like old flyers from like comedy shows. And literally Jerry Seinfeld was just like, why do you have all this crap, Bill? I don't care. It's basically, this is his show. It's just people like, come on, Bill, like, what's your problem? They're just like moderately annoyed by him.
I also just really enjoy the fact that Bill Maher, like when he hears Burr saying, I can see you not, hitting well in Boston, because you have the energy of the kid, who's telling the teacher that she forgot to assign homework. That like the way that Bill Maher takes that is like, oh, well, you're saying that the Bostonians are stupid. It's like, I don't think that is what he was saying.
No, he was saying they don't like annoying guys, I think.
yeah, exactly. It's like, oh no, actually, Bill, Boston is full of highbrow intellectuals who appreciate my sophisticated comedy.
Well, it's true.
Does your shit jokes float above ours?
A little bit.
Why? Because you say Setmet tank or something? Or something about shit?
Wait, what was I just going to tell you? God damn it.
Nothing interesting.
No, it was. What were we talking about? Something.
No, we were talking about
something
going
important.
to Boston.
Boston. Thank you. Yes. I love Boston. It loves me. That's been going. I did a special there in 2007. I have a love affair with the Boston audience. We are like this because they're just very smart. What can I tell you? I know you hate to hear that, but
no, it just sounds like it sounds like you have a gig coming up in Boston and the tickets are a little slow.
No, they're never slow in Boston. Never slow in Boston. But
do you perform in Cambridge?
Cambridge.
That's where Harvard is. For a guy like
I
you,
know that.
That's got to be the Taj Mahal. I love that.
I hate Harvard. Are you kidding? Have you heard what's going on college campuses these days?
I don't watch the news.
You don't realize that college campuses erupted with the kids demonstrating for Hamas? They are in with the terrorists.
They were for the Palestinians.
Well, it's sort of the same cause.
Come on, Bill.
Why? Are you?
I'm on the side of the kids.
Yeah, that's easy to say. No one wants to see kids dead. This is a war.
That was very brave of you to say.
Well, that's so easy to say. You don't want dead kids. I mean, that's come on, that's cheap. So like us serious people like me and the highbrow Harvard intellectuals who love my comedy show, like we understand that sometimes you have to kill some kids.
Yeah, I don't know. Like watching this, it just seems like why like, why is Bill Maher still doing this? Maybe almost, like if a guy like Bill Burr, who seems to like not even devote a whole lot of his like thinking to like what's going on in the world and politics, is like has a more nuanced view of this. It's like, why not take like the Jerry Seinfeld route, Bill Maher, and just talk about like Pop-Tarts and yogurt and stuff, like I don't know.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, this is like, just the fact that like, I would also say, just on a completely serious note, like he says they're protesting for Hamas.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, it's lazy. It's sort of like, like I don't know, like just you saw like somebody say something on cable news or something, and you're like, oh, I'll just repeat that on the show. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's and it's also kind of amazing because look, Bill Maher has a bad enough record that you have to kind of search for things he's been right about. But, he was at least, somewhat critical of the war in Iraq, when it was about to start. I was watching him back then, it seemed like whatever wavering he was doing, he was basically against it. I could remember him on Real Time saying in so many words that he was glad that the peace marches, were going on. So it's like, hold up. Like the same lazy ass demonization that you just did with the anti-war protests about Gaza. I mean, why not say that like what's the difference between that and saying that people who were protesting Iraq in 2003 were protesting for Saddam?
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's very weird. Did you ever see, I feel like maybe I sent this to you. Do you remember that show Dinner for Five? Did you ever watch that? It was Jon Favreau did a show where he would have celebrities come on, and they would, the format would be they would eat dinner and they would film it. And it was basically like an interview of like 5 famous people. And there's one where it's Bill Maher. It's one of my favorites. It's one of the funniest clips ever. It's Bill Maher, and I think it was like Alanis Morissette, maybe somebody like that, and Bob Odenkirk. And Bob Odenkirk is doing the same thing. This is probably like 10 years ago, is doing the same thing that Bill Burr is doing to Bill Maher. People have been making fun of Bill Maher forever. Like, I think he's kind of a goof. And there's a part in that interview where Bill Maher goes, yeah, when I moved to Hollywood, I was originally like an actor. I was in a movie called Pizza Boy, all this. And Bob Odenkirk does one of the funniest things I've ever heard. He goes, oh, so you're just an actor giving us your political views. And I have it as a drop, actually. It's one of my favorite things. And when I see stuff like this, I always think that, like, he's just an actor giving us his political views. That's what it feels like right now. He's just like,
You actually, believe it or not, they actually cut to that in the next minute.
Yes,
okay.
Please.
Okay, nice. Looking forward to that. It's just remarkably lazy and like, whatever. I'm happy to have anybody sound off about anything, but like, but it's just, anybody who's willing to like put like a minute of thought into it, I'm happy to have sound off about anything. But like this pro Hamas thing tells me that is not. Also, I don't know why he's bringing up Pizza Boy. Like, by far the high point of Bill Maher's acting career was Cannibal Women in the Amazon Jungle of Death.
Oh man, I gotta watch that.
There's avocados somewhere in that title.
You're right. It's Cannibal Women. No, I guess maybe there's no Amazon in there. Maybe it's just Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death.
When did that come out? Is that like a 90s thing? 84. That's like around the pizza
I think
board.
It was after DC Cab.
Okay, so it's around the era when he was like he was hustling as an actor.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It's 1989. So yeah, it's which yeah, 84 probably would have been more my guess, but yeah, there's a lot of 80s stuff going on in that movie. I actually enjoy the shit out of that, but
I gotta watch that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird, like, I don't know, it's like a little bit of an Apocalypse Now parody. It's a lot going on, but
Okay.
Yeah,
but,
and it's funny despite Bill Maher.
yeah. Well, I kind of think Bill Maher is asked what he's asked to do in that movie is about, you know, what he's good for.
Right. I feel like he would be good as a bad teacher or something. Like he's maybe he's like the civics teacher at a public school, and he, like, if you attach $10 to the test, he'll give you an A or something. Like, that would be a good Bill Maher role.
He's supposed to. He thinks he's Indiana Jones, but he's absolutely inept at being Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I mean that's the character, and again,
Yeah.
I think Bill Maher's particular energy is good for that character.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I think in real life, Bill Maher thought he was playing Indiana Jones in this movie.
Yeah, you know what? Synchronization, Dan. I'd actually be totally down to watch Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death with patrons in the Discord. Let's see if we can set that up. But in any case,
we got to do a movie segment on this show eventually, for sure. Because we're both equally, I think, especially that kind of movie, we're equally obsessed.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you were in LA,
that was so fun. Yeah, I loved rewatching that. That was great.
Yeah, we went to go see Evil Dead 2 in a theater near me. So
Nice.
A farewell to arms, one of the greatest gags in a movie ever.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, it was good too. It was an audience that really, you know, knew and appreciated what it was watching. But
totally on board. Yes.
I know it sounds like
This is a war. No, I'm the one who's actually brave on this.
Pat yourself on the back.
It's easy to say I'm for the kids. Who's not for the kids?
Well,
it comes down to real hard-nosed decisions. Like a country.
Stop talking like you're a general.
A country got attacked. Israel got attacked.
I'm not saying that they didn't have a right to go back. I'm just sitting there going, like, how do I look at what?
We're the only country in the world that they get attacked, and then as soon as they counterattack, it's like, well, we got to stop this shit now. Don't attack them. There's a very simple solution to all this problem in the Middle East. Stop attacking Israel.
Hey, you
Stop
just solved
attacking
it.
Israel.
You just solved it.
I actually
did. There you
did.
go. That's fantastic.
Anyway.
All right.
We don't need to get onto that.
Let's go to Russia and the Ukraine. How do you solve that one, Bill? Let me hear your hard-nosed decision about that. Well, let me ask you a question. How is war still legal? All the shit that's been canceled.
Legal.
Why is that still fucking legal?
Would you like a real answer to that? Because for something to be illegal, you have to have the capacity to enforce it. And you can't enforce against war, or else you have to go to war with the country that's going to war.
So at the end there, Bill is sort of plotting, you know, like in this weird meandering way. He's like 80% of the way towards understanding the rationale for like having like the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, and why these institutions should be much stronger than they are. I don't think he realizes that's where he's going, but he's really teetering on the edge of that realization. But this is also like his, I mean, you know, putting aside that like his, you know, I think that the you know, whatever Hillary Clinton says about the kids not understanding the history, I would absolutely put a lot of money on any random student who is taken out of a protest having a greater understanding of the chain of causality leading up to what's going on in Gaza right now than Bill just showed. But also this thing about how he's taking the really brave position. It's like, why is this brave? Because like Bill Burr will make fun of you for saying it. Like that's the brave thing. Like that's what you're standing up to. Because like otherwise, it's like, I don't know, man. It seems like we had, you know, like at the encampment at UCLA, there was actual mob violence that was directed against the protesters. one of the protests at Columbia after there was actually like a kind of Charlottesville style lone wolf attack where somebody who's actually a member of the extended family of Maher Kahana drove his car into one of the protesters. Certainly, there have been lots of employers talking about blacklists. The Congress passed something called the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act that essentially redefines a lot of what protesters have been saying as a form of anti-Semitism. There are multiple senators who've been talking about putting campus protesters on the no-fly list, and I understand that last one's probably not going to happen, but I don't know. I mean, if we're just gonna do, I mean, I don't even think it's that important a question, but if we're gonna do an evaluation of which position is braver to take, then maybe the fact that Bill Maher's liberal comedian friends will look at him funny if he says it isn't actually the thing that requires the most bravery to stand up to.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching a lot of CNN the past couple weeks, and I saw a Kevin O'Leary clip. That guy Shark Tank? I just call him Shark Tank, the bald guy. And he his whole thing was hey, if you keep, he's saying this to the student protesters. He was like, hey, if you keep protesting, you're gonna ruin your future. I'm not gonna hire you. I'll find out. I'll look at your. I'll do a deep dive on your backstory if you apply to work at whatever dumb scam company that guy started or whatever. And I won't hire you. That's so they're saying you're risking your future in the corporate world. That's closer to bravery to me than just some rich guy saying something that everybody else is saying. I mean. I would venture as far as to say that it's not very brave, actually, Bill.
Yeah, for Bill Maher to agree with Joe Biden and Donald Trump and the New York Times and
everybody, every mainstream thing. Yeah.
It's I mean, again, you're standing up to the possibility that that Bill Burr is going to
give you a little bit of a hard time.
Yeah, exactly. It seems to me like you're probably okay. I mean, even compared to like all the people who've risked getting expelled from the university that it probably meant a lot to them to get into.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, that seems harder. But all right, let's watch one last little bit of this.
And we don't want to go to war with Russia over Ukraine. What would be the sense of making it illegal? Oh, that's really going to stop Putin. No. To stop people from going to war, you have to also put boots.
Can't sit down and talk it out. Why can't Putin do a podcast with the head guy? You just solved the Middle East on a podcast. Why can't they solve what they're doing on a podcast?
This is why this is not your thing.
Make some hard nosed. It's not your thing. It's what you.
That is my.
It isn't your thing.
This is not your thing.
You're like that guy that has a fantasy football team and thinks he's a fucking GM.
No.
That's exactly what it is. Why am I fucking listening to you like you've done something? What have you done in Washington? Nothing.
No, I would never go to Washington.
It's beneath you.
No, it would. Look,
you would be the coolest fucking guy in Washington. You showed up with those boots
it would be so
and
easy.
no tie. They'd be like, oh my God.
It'd be so easy to be.
Did Kevin Bacon just come back to that Footloose town?
Kevin Bacon.
You could teach him how to dance, Bill.
I love that. It's beneath you. It's so funny.
Yeah, that was kind of perfect. But all right. R.M. Brown, thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Ben. Always good to talk to you, and I hope to see you in person soon. We'll go watch some more old cult, bad movies together.
All right. Sounds good, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
To be clear, the Democrat governor of Michigan who ran in part on fixing the injustice and delivering for Flint she told you, I can't help you with that
Right,
money.
because I brought that back up when she got in office. This is what we need to have happen.
But she told you, sorry.
People have Flint fatigue. And I thought, Flint fatigue? We've got it. We're the ones fatigued.
Arthur Woodson is worried. Cancer rates here in his hometown of Flint are soaring. The disease taking the lives of his loved ones.
Very concerning. My aunt passed away. She had 5 different cancers. My cousin passed away. She had 3 different cancers. Here in Flint, it's like every other day you hearing somebody either diagnosed with multiple myeloma. Matter of fact, what got me started was my friend was diagnosed with multiple myeloma November 2016. I delivered some water to her, and she said, man, my friend across the street got multiple myeloma. Because I was telling her how rare it is. I said, your friend got multiple myeloma. So I started knocking on her doors. In 1 block radius, I found 6 multiple myeloma. Now this is 1 in every 100,000. How is it possible, if it's rare, for 6 people in 1 block radius to have multiple myeloma?
And this was about 2 years after the water switch?
Correct. Just recently I found 7 other people on Brownell with kidney cancer and like 7 different cancers, 5 different cancers. I mean, it's rapid on just 1 street.
These aren't all elderly people. We're talking people in their 40s, 50s.
We're talking about 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
I'm talking about, I know a young girl have breast cancer, 8 years old.
Yeah, so that's from the new documentary Flint Fatigue, and I watched it last night. I found it, incredibly disturbing, even knowing a lot of the story. And the man you just watched in that clip doing the interviews, Jordan Chariton, joins me now to break it all down for me. Welcome to the show, Jordan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So this is something that there's a lot here in this movie, and this is something I know you've been covering for a very long time. I mean, when did you start going to Flint and covering what was going on there?
I first went there summer of 2016, so kind of took a break from the campaign carnival of 2016 and went to whatever you would phrase what was going on in Flint. But it was very clear to me, when I went for the first time in 2016, the mainstream media had already kind of done their parachute in and out act, and they had kind of moved on to the Trump circus. So when I went in the summer of 2016, all the cameras were pretty much gone. And it was very clear very quickly that this was, I think people kind of become numb to the word crisis, but this was beyond a crisis. It was kind of like an apocalyptic disaster zone. And sadly, it really hasn't changed much, despite media narratives, trying to make it seem that it's gotten better. It really, in many ways, is the same, if not worse, 10 years later.
Yeah, I mean, this is so people generally call this the Flint water crisis, which is such a kind of anemic way of putting it. I mean, like that, I don't know, kind of reminds me of that old like George Carlin thing about, the difference between calling it shell shock and calling it, post-traumatic stress disorder. That because just sort of saying water crisis doesn't really get it across. I mean, honestly, the feeling that I kept getting when I was watching this movie is, not unlike the feeling that I get watching things about Gaza, that here you have this entire population of human beings that is just sort of been, is just kind of treated as disposable, that it doesn't, that sort of the overwhelming sense you get from listening to politicians and, and major media is that this doesn't really matter. very much, what happens to them. Like, because this is, I think a lot of people, and I want you to take me through the whole history of what happened, but I think a lot of people, like, their impression about what happened is that, well, for some reason or another, there was water going into the taps in Flint that had too much lead in it, and that led to some health problems, and then they fixed it. Right? That's I think what a lot of people think. But I think watching your movie, it becomes clear, right? Every single part of that is wrong, starting with the fact that when you just talk about lead levels, that doesn't really get across everything that's happened. I mean, not, the lead is bad enough, but I mean, there's also, just in general, what these people not only were exposed to, but, I mean, are still being exposed to, involves a lot more than just lead.
Yeah. I mean, it's honestly, I don't even use the word crisis anymore. I just call this the biggest government cover-up of the 21st century. Frankly, based on everything I've uncovered, and I've been working on this for 8 years, I mean, this makes Watergate look like a picnic. I mean, Watergate, if it wasn't the president, was kind of just some, garden variety numbskulls. But this is a cover-up that weaves in Wall Street, which many people don't realize, which I'll explain. Federal government involved in the cover-up, state government, local government, city government, county government. I mean, it's every level. And it's ongoing. I mean, even in third world countries, if something like this happened, they might throw like one low-level person under the bus and throw them in jail. I mean, here, not one person is in jail. But I'll start from the beginning. A lot of people don't know that. Well, I'll even go further back. A lot of cities in America, basically by the turn of the century, were broke for a lot of reasons. Offshoring of jobs, white flight out of cities like Flint and Detroit, racist rezoning laws, but their tax places like Flint, which used to be kind of the envy of America, back Roger and Me, which was Michael Moore's film, showed that Flint back in the day, like the 1940s, 50s, 60s, was like the birthplace of the middle class. And half a century later, it was kind of like a dying economic carcass because of, General Motors offshoring their jobs, white flight, a lot of things.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, this is, I grew up in Lansing and East Lansing, so, about an hour, a little bit less than that, away from Flint. And certainly, I think mid-Michigan in general, right, that there were very high standards of living that were achieved for tons of people because of the unionized auto jobs. And the, to varying extents in various places, but sort of most severely in Flint and Detroit.
Yeah.
The loss of those jobs, really, really destroyed those cities. That's what Roger and Me that you mentioned is about to a great extent. But then, so as a result of this, there are all these cities that are having financial problems, and this is where, certainly not the only one, and it's a very bipartisan story that you tell, but one of the big villains of this story, Rick Snyder, comes in, right? So he was, I remember when he was running for governor. I think a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily normally vote for Republican voted for him. He was sort of seen as this kind of inoffensive, sort of almost apolitical technocrat. That was kind of his branding. Yeah. But
called himself one tough nerd.
Yes, exactly, right. But really, it was a horror show as a governor. And one of the things that you really highlight in the movie, and I mean, like, one of my favorite sort of exchanges in the movie, you're bringing up kind of the way that liberals always talk about Trump and, you know, and elections, about democracy, right? It's really, you know, important above all else to defend democracy. And what happened to Flint was, you know, precisely because democracy was taken away from these people.
Yeah. And by the way, that law is still in the books in Michigan. So for people that don't remember, when Governor Snyder got elected, we're, 2010, so about 14 years ago, Flint, Detroit, a lot of other cities happen to be majority black cities, were, struggling financially, some worse than others. So Snyder kind of ran, low on a state level, like a Mitt Romney run government like a business type of campaign, which Republicans love. And as soon as he got in there, they basically seized local government. They rammed through an emergency. They declared a financial emergency in Flint and Detroit, and they put in unelected, essentially czars. They call them emergency managers to supersede the power of the elected mayor, the elected city council. And by all intents and purposes, these emergency managers were just puppets for Governor Snyder. So really, Governor Snyder was kind of the king of Flint. He was, through his emergency managers, ruling not just Flint, Detroit, a couple other cities, and
which is also, incidentally, right, it's where I think the majority of the black population of the state was living in cities that no longer held self-rule because of the emergency manager law.
Yeah. And this is going way back, but this is kind of like in a galaxy. If people can remember pre-Trump, Snyder actually was angling to run for president. He wanted to run, angle for the GOP nomination in 2016. So in 2014, 15, he's going to, when he was still alive, Sheldon Adelson's Republican Jewish Coalition Conference. He's presenting to donors. Every Republican had to go kiss the ring of Adelson, if they wanted to have a serious shot at the GOP nomination. So essentially, Snyder puts these emergency managers in, and right away they start hollowing out public services, start making cuts to, city employees, cops, firefighters, to, balance the budget and improve Flint's finances. And they had a brilliant idea. Flint had gotten its water from Detroit for 50 years. And, some issues, but overall quality water. It comes from the Great Lakes. Detroit was sending Flint water from Lake Huron, which is some of the most pure water on earth. The Great Lakes provide 20% of the world's surface freshwater. So Flint was getting water from Detroit, but there was a lot of people, we're talking for decades, that wanted the county that Flint was part of, Genesee County, to have their own water system and not be reliant on Detroit. They kind of tried to spin it as it would save us money, but in reality, there was a lot of, we don't want Detroit, which happened to be, majority black. Infamously had, Kwame Kilpatrick was the first black mayor there, went down for bribery, among other things. But the local county bosses, foundations, local politicians, they were majority white. And they wanted to basically cut off Detroit, bankrupt Detroit. And one of the ways to do that would be pulling Flint, which was Detroit's largest water customer. Flint purchasing water from Detroit. If Detroit lost Flint as a customer, its water system would basically go belly up. And one of Detroit's only assets left was its water department. So basically, they came up with this idea: let's create a brand new water system. They said it wasn't privatized, but for all intents and purposes, it was privatized. And Michael Moore actually shows it in his documentary, Fahrenheit 11/9, because he does a section on Flint in that documentary. they built this new water pipeline on literally the exact same parallel path. So Detroit's water pipeline from Detroit to Flint, they just built a duplicative pipeline parallel to it, taking water out of the same source, bringing it to Flint. And why this was never about saving money, the media, because they're lazy and, in my view, corrupt, just kind of pushed the narrative that this was a tragedy born from trying to save money. It wasn't about saving money. It was about making money. So Detroit didn't want to lose Flint as a customer. Flint was complaining that Detroit keeps price gouging the city of Flint and raising its water rates. So at the last minute in 2013, in order to not lose Flint to this brand new water system, Detroit offered to cut Flint's water rate by 48%. So just, you go into the store, everything's half off. That's pretty damn good if you want to save money. Independent engineers kind of compared Flint staying on Detroit's system compared to joining this new water system. They agreed Flint would save money staying at Detroit. Snyder, his emergency managers, local officials, it was not about saving money. It was about basically a financial scheme, a financial boondoggle to create this privatized new water system. So they said, see you, Detroit. Flint's going to join this new water system. But here was the thing. This new water pipeline was going to cost close to $300 million to build. Enter Wall Street. The county, which owned this new water system, they were going to basically be the majority owner of this new water pipeline. They didn't have all the funding to build it. They needed the city of Flint to come in and kind of cover part of the construction. Well, Flint was almost bankrupt in 2013, 2014. Because it was under emergency management, it had to get the state's approval for anything above $50,000, and legally it had reached its debt limit, because on the state level you do have debt and all that. So legally they were not allowed to borrow more money for anything, let alone a $300 million water system. In state law, though, they could borrow the money if there was an emergency. So folks from JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, local officials in the county, in Flint, officials in Snyder's office, they said, let's create an emergency. So they basically kind of like took some sludge lagoon, basically a pit of sludge by the Flint water plant that had been there for decades. There was no rush to clean it up. And they went to the environmental department of Michigan and said, this is an emergency. We have to clean this up. Give us $100 million.
Yeah. And by the way, how much would it actually have cost just to clean that up?
Maybe $1 million.
Okay. So, this is the, like the idea that that's like, oh, there's this debt limit, so you can't borrow any more money unless there's an emergency. Hey, there's this emergency that would cost maybe $1 million. So to deal with that, can I have $100 million, and I'm going to spend almost all of it on this completely unrelated thing.
And in this environmental order, I won't
just save money. Save money.
I won't get too in the weeds, but basically in this environmental order to clean up this sludge pit, through the back door, was $100 million for Flint to join this new water system. And that's where the Flint River came into place. It would take 2 years to build this new water pipeline. Flint could have stayed on Detroit's water over those 2 years. None of this would have happened then. The county, Genesee County, which is majority white, and Flint is the biggest city in Genesee County. Genesee County continued getting its water from Detroit. They didn't use the Flint River. They let the poor black folks use the Flint River. And for those of you in Michigan or Flint, I don't need to explain it. For the rest of you, the Flint River was basically the dumping ground for every corporate polluter known to man. Going back to the 1800s, we're talking the lumber mills in Flint. Then we move on to the 20th century. General Motors was dumping its waste in the Flint River. Dow Chemical, DuPont. I mean, literally the first time I got to Flint, it looked green. I mean, people I talked to who grew up in Flint would say, oh, yeah, back in the day when we used to get water from the Flint River, because they used to back in like the 1950s, 60s, I mean, they routinely get brown water. And it just it was one of the most polluted water rivers in America. So the notion that you're going to use the Flint River, but it wasn't just the Flint River, the water plant, you know, all of the, right now, everybody sees all these Boeing planes are like falling apart midair. The water plant was the equivalent of like a Boeing 757, and you go on it with 1.5 wings. I mean, the water plant, literally the week that they were switching to the Flint River, was still ordering equipment. They didn't even have the proper equipment to add the proper chemicals. You know, a lot of news stories said, oh, they failed to add the proper chemicals to avoid lead from leaching out. It's not that they failed. The water plant didn't even have the equipment to add it. So it was just basically this slapdash operation. Let's rush this baby into operation. Let's switch to the Flint River, because technically the emergency manager, Snyder, his people thought, well, technically in this 2-year period, while this new water system is being built, Flint could technically get its water for free. And that would, you know, cut down on Flint's debt, because they wouldn't have to pay Detroit $1 million a month. That's what they were paying Detroit. Well, it wasn't for free, because they were supposed to make upwards of $60 million in upgrades to the water plant. They didn't do that. So essentially, it's kind of like get on a Boeing plane and they'll add the parts mid-flight. That's what they were doing at the plant. And obviously, we know what happened. They didn't add the proper chemicals. It wasn't only lead. The media only focused on lead, but there was bacteria in the water, E. coli, Legionnaire's disease, which is kind of like a waterborne form of pneumonia, very deadly. There was PFAS, which are those forever chemicals that are not just in Flint. I mean, they're found all over the country, cause cancer, miscarriages, other things. So, yeah, I mean, essentially what you had here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is really like a, I mean, there are scenes in the movie where, you know, somebody, you know, who's like having trouble speaking, like opens up her mouth. You see she's got all this missing teeth, you know, from drinking the water. You know, shows you the scars on her body from, you know, from bathing in it. The clip that we watched earlier, you know, there's some, you know, like a rate of multiple melanoma within, you know, a few block radius. That's like the equivalent of like every slot machine, you know, being one at the same time, you know, next to each other. And this is so I mean, it's worth underlining that this is something that like is all comes out of a decision to stop using perfectly serviceable clean water, that was made not by elected officials, but by this you know, this unelected emergency manager, and you know, is, you know, allegedly to save money, although when you look at the details of that, that's, you know, incredibly dubious. And was certainly, I mean, like, I assume that JP Morgan, all those people don't, you know, they don't give loans out of charity, right? Like they were I assume they were expecting to make a lot of money, you know, out of this, right? That's why they did this, right? So I mean, this you know, looks like
Wall Street, like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, people's eyes kind of gloss over when the word like hearing the word bonds, because it's kind of Wall Street, it's financial, but like Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, they are making hand over fist. We're talking billions of dollars a year on municipal bonds, because cities like Flint, Detroit, other cities, not just cities, I mean, even local municipalities, they don't have the money, right? Like they don't have the money on hand, liquid, to fund infrastructure upgrades, things like that. So they go to the banks to basically finance or underwrite bonds. So JP Morgan and Wells Fargo fronted the money to build this new water system, and they make a ton of money on the principal plus interest, all these hidden line items of charges. So JP Morgan and Wells Fargo, they were very, very involved in this. They were actually sued civilly, not criminally, which to me is criminal, but they were sued civilly in 2020 on behalf of 2,600 Flint children. Of course, it got thrown out of court because this is America. So why hold banks accountable? But yeah, I mean, bottom line, this didn't need to happen. Yeah, it was a boondoggle, but if Flint would have just stayed on Detroit's water system, nobody would have been poisoned. It just would have been a scam like many other scams in America.
Right.
But I think what makes this even worse, it's not only like the financial scam leading up to the Flint River switch. Then you get into like, you literally have government officials fully aware that the water is toxic. And they are, instead of notifying the residents, like, you know, Paul Revere, the British are coming, like, instead of immediately, as soon as the governor knows, holding a press conference, you know, sending out health advisories to Flint, they cover it up based on my reporting. This governor knew about the deadly Legionnaires outbreak in October 2014. So 6 months after the water switch, it was already killing people in Flint. He didn't notify Flint for a year and a half after that. So, I mean, that is intentionally, it's not just that he didn't notify it. His administration went into a very, very widespread cover up to cover their tracks and make sure it didn't get out. So, and
to the point, I mean, I remember from that Michael Moore documentary you mentioned, Fahrenheit 11/9. One of the things that always stuck in my memory the most from that movie was that there was a point when the bad water from the Flint River was going into an auto plant and it was causing problems, and they managed to reroute to them, right? Because it's like, oh, okay, well, crap, right? This is this is bad. There's so much bad stuff going on in this water that this is bad for the production process. But meanwhile, it's allowed to continue to flow into the homes of people in Flint.
Yeah. So there's two examples. One is what you just said. Like, literally, General Motors started noticing that the Flint River water was rusting and damaging its parts in July, like 2 months after the water was switched. So they immediately, start going to local officials in Flint, like, something's not right here. They started getting their water shipped in from Detroit. And the emergency manager in Flint, because they didn't want to lose General Motors had already pretty much left Flint. They only had a few factories left. So the city of Flint was going to bend over backwards to keep General Motors. So they said to General Motors, we'll switch you, we'll reroute you to Flint Township's water, which is right next to Flint. It's not on the Flint River. But the residents still need to drink this water that's literally destroying car parts. Then you have, in January 2015, the Snyder administration, they had an office in Flint. So Snyder administration office workers in Flint, they start getting bottled water delivered and stop using the water fountains. Meanwhile, the Snyder administration is telling the actual residents, oh no, the water's fine. The whole brown water, it's just an aesthetics thing. It's not a health thing. While those same officials are having bottled water delivered. I mean, you cannot get more like tale of two cities, tale of two countries than literally having bottled water delivered to you while you lie to residents and allow children to drink and bathe in this. It's criminal. And, it's always frankly pissed me off because I keep going back to Flint, and here I am like covering, in my view, I don't use this word casually based on what's going on in Gaza, but I believe this is environmental genocide. The bodies might not pile up as quickly as we're seeing in Gaza, but over time, I mean, thousands of people are dying from this over the last decade, and probably thousands more will die because cancer for some people can come in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Right now, Flint is the fastest growing cancer cluster in America. The media doesn't care. The media doesn't cover it. And I kept going back to Flint. And when I go to the hotel, 2017, 2018, I turn on CNN, they're covering Trump's tweets. I turn on independent media. It's whatever bullshit reactionary nonsense. And it's part of this is a media story, because how does a government poison a city and it just gets swept under the rug if the media basically allows that to happen?
Yeah. And there is, from very early on, this is a, there's a bipartisan, story here. Barack Obama, when president, famously, went to Flint and God, I don't know if you remember that Simpsons episode where Mr. Burns, is going to take a bite of the three-eyed fish to prove that they're safe, right? That Obama essentially does the same thing and is going to, perhaps take the tiniest sip of a glass of Flint water to show that he thinks it's safe. And if you actually look at it, it's not even clear that any of it's entering his mouth, in that shot. But then, as far as
I can't tell you mentioning Michael Moore. I don't know, but according to Michael Moore, that was water from Air Force One, not Flint. So take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, that's just the gesture is amazing too, right? Because it's okay, so you have it's oh look, I took a tiny sip of this thing that you're if you want to take a bath, give your small children a bath, that cook with water, any of these things that that it and everything that's in it is just pummeling your immune system all day every day. But then as far as the Michigan part of it, we have another clip from the movie that that gets into this, because I think that I think that the thing a lot of people sort of hear this and they assume that it's okay, even if they kind of remember the story, they know some of the basics, that they kind of take this as very past tense in a way that it's really not.
When you were mayor, we're begging multiple governors, Governor Snyder and then Governor Whitmer, for funding to replace residents' interior plumbing, the plumbing inside their home, which was also damaged by the Flint River.
Correct.
The main pipes were never replaced, and the interior pipes inside residents' homes weren't replaced. So even when they replace all the lead service lines, which they have not done 10 years later.
10 years later. You said it. I did beg for that. I begged for that because I said that is so important, because we still don't have access to clean water when those things haven't been addressed.
I would say the quality of Flint water matches or exceeds most of the water in the state of Michigan and in the country right now. And what happens to it once it gets to the home is kind of out of our control.
They count on people not understanding basic plumbing like I didn't. And our laws are so outdated that the Safe Drinking Water Act and Lead and Copper Rule only cover the service line, which is, like you said, the distribution mains that come from the water treatment plant run under the streets. And then the service line connects that main to the house. And then inside the house is your internal plumbing of fixtures and appliances. And until our lawsuit, the only part that was actually covered was the connection at the street. So the line leading up to the house wasn't even touched. And that's my lawsuit to replace the service lines. So we were able to fight that and get that put in, but that's still one piece. It's basically a straw. So it's basically a clean straw to pull in water that's already been contaminated by the mains. And then that's going to be pumped through the house, where all of our plumbing inside of our house is still bad, still leaking. And then our fixtures, so our faucets and our appliances like our dishwashers, water heaters, washing machines are all corroded. So unless all of that is replaced, which is what the goal and what the ask and demand was, unless all of that is replaced, our water is never going to be safe for everybody. It's going to continue to fluctuate. It's going to continue to have problems.
So, and this is all, under, that like this entire time, right? because for the last several years, the governor of Michigan has been, Jennifer Whitmer, who used to Gretchen Whitmer, sorry, just conflated the names of two Democratic governors in Michigan. But yeah, Gretchen Whitmer used to be my state representative in East Lansing, and as somebody who I think has like a very positive like national profile among liberals, because of the politics of COVID and just maybe, being a better communicator than a lot of Democrats and things like this. But I mean, this is really, under, now, Democratic governor for several years, right? I mean, this situation has still been allowed to languish, and and this is and and it's not just state level, right? I mean, because I know there's a federal layer of involvement here too, but one of the things that comes out, so there are all these things that would like fixtures that would need to be replaced, to get actually clean water that doesn't have all these contaminants in people's homes that haven't been replaced. And something else that that comes out in the movie is that you've got all of these claims that are constantly being made about how the water is fine now, but a lot of those claims are just based on just fraudulent testing procedures.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even need to be like a plumber or engineer. I mean, just common sense. If essentially acid was going through all of the pipes in your city that bring you water, and they only have replaced like not even 1/3 of those pipes, those pipes are destroyed. I mean, I've seen the inside of some of those pipes post Flint River. I mean, it looks like, just Google some gross sexually transmitted disease. Sorry to say. I mean, it's disgusting. It is severely, severely corroded. And so even if you have technically clean water coming from the plant, if it's going through these pipes that are severely corroded, heavy metals are still leaching off of those pipes. The other issue, which is not about the pipes, it's not just Flint. Many cities have this problem. Flint's water system, which is 600 miles worth of pipes, were built for the city when it had 200,000 residents. It has 80,000 residents now. There are many, many neighborhoods, particularly on the north side of Flint, that are just blocks of abandoned homes that have no water use. So when you have that, water is just running stagnant through this system. And not to get too in the weeds, but when water runs stagnant, the chlorine that is added to water in order to avoid bacteria gets soaked up, and that leads to bacteria because you don't have enough chlorine to fight bacteria. So long story short, they haven't replaced all the pipes 10 years later, even though we see media headlines claiming they have. They haven't, because there's 3 sets of pipes and they've only addressed one of them. The reason the documentary is called Flint Fatigue is because the former mayor, she went to Whitmer. I mean, she was very excited when Gretchen Whitmer got elected because obviously this happened under Rick Snyder and he wasn't doing much for Flint. And Gretchen Whitmer ran on, I'm going to reopen the free water stations. Those were where we saw on TV, like cars wrapped around blocks waiting for free bottled water. Snyder shut those stations down. She said she was going to reopen them. Well, she's been in office for 5 years, has never reopened them. And when the former mayor went to Whitmer saying, I need more help from the state to replace residents' plumbing inside their homes that was damaged, Whitmer, this is from the former mayor, and Whitmer's office never denied it. She said, I can't get you any more money. The state legislature has, quote, Flint fatigue. Essentially, yeah, I'm not going to fight for Flint. And meanwhile, you got the New York Times, the Washington Post, every other, corporate racket. They're doing adoring puff pieces on Gretchen Whitmer. I get it. She had a lot of things going on, including COVID. But I mean, bottom line, you can't blame her for what happened. She was not in office, but you certainly can't give her credit for solving it, because she's basically just thrown a lot of, promises out, like many Democrats do, and hasn't delivered. And, this could make you a hero. I mean, frankly, Snyder could have been made a hero if the Republican governor would have right away, when he knew there was a problem, warned the residents, stopped them from drinking the water, and fixed it. Yeah, I mean, he'd get a little criticism, but at least he would have done the right thing. And Gretchen Whitmer could have came in here. She could have reopened the water stations. She could have, lobbied the federal government, because Obama, many people don't know this, part of why this was never fixed is Obama refused to issue a disaster declaration for Flint. Similar, Joe Biden has refused to issue a disaster declaration for East Palestine, which I was, that's another chemical petri dish. I got sick within an hour in East Palestine, yet the EPA is telling everyone it's fine. It's not fine. But the difference between a disaster declaration and an emergency declaration, a disaster declaration is federal, and the federal government could take over. So you could send the Army Corps of Engineers into Flint. They could have digged up the pipes, could have replaced all the pipes with federal money in a year. But because he did a state of emergency, you get less funding, less resources. The excuse that Obama made was a disaster declaration is only for, by law, is only for natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, etc. But there were lawyers and constitutional types that argued, this exceptions can be made with something like this. He didn't do it. And Biden, same thing is playing out with East Palestine. And it's really why I want people to watch this documentary. Why I stay on Flint is it's really not just about Flint. I mean, if they get away with it in Flint, they're going to use the exact same playbook elsewhere. And they are. I mean, it hasn't gotten a lot of coverage recently, but what's going on in East Palestine, Ohio, where Norfolk Southern blew up this, train filled with toxic chemicals. I mean, this honestly, based on my reporting, based on experts I've spoken to, based on my own symptoms, based on symptoms I know residents are still having, this town should have been evacuated. I mean, common sense, you cannot blow up 1.1 million pounds of toxic vinyl chloride, which is linked with leukemia, brain cancer, breast cancer, all sorts of things. And it just dissipates and, it goes away. Still to this day, like Biden, when he went there for his photo op, he didn't do it at City Hall. He didn't do it at the fire station. He literally did it in the candle shop. That's where they have public events because the candle shop covers up the chemical smell. Meanwhile, the EPA is putting out there, oh, we're not finding any chemicals. So my point is, it's still very much a crisis. In Flint, I was just there for the 10-year anniversary. Residents were posting images of water they're getting now that's brown. Now, 10 years later.
Yeah. So what something you talk about in the documentary is the way that when the inspectors come in to test the water levels, I mean, they're not they come up with these very rosy claims about how there isn't that much lead, and of course lead was never the only issue. But you basically say, look, if you actually look at how they're doing this versus how they're supposed to be doing this, we have no idea how much lead is in that water.
Yeah. So in 2018, I got a tip from a couple residents that Snyder, he was still in office, his environmental department was basically going to people's homes, residents' homes, and running their water, like turning it on and letting it run for like 5 minutes before putting the sample bottle under. You don't have to be an expert. If you're running the water for 5 minutes, you're flushing out the lead. Right. And then you put the sample under and voila, very low lead levels. So I started knocking on doors and it was just staggering. I mean, this was going on like out in the open. Snyder's environmental department, their officials were going to residents' homes. Residents didn't know any better. They just, the government's here and they're doing something great. They don't know how the water's supposed to be tested. So we found that, dozens and we knocked on 400 doors. A lot of people didn't answer. A lot of people in Flint don't trust people knocking on their doors. Sure. We got like almost 40 residents on the record and with paperwork in many cases showing very, very suspect discrepancies. Like a resident would have like astronomical lead levels in 1 month, and the next month after the state of Michigan comes and tests their water, it's down like hundreds of parts per billion of lead. Well, they didn't change the pipes. So how does it go from like 1,000 parts per billion of lead, which is very, very high, down to 3? So they were running the water. And I actually got Newsweek. I was very excited at the time because I was, part of the battle has been trying to get media to pick up my stories, try and get media, as an independent journalist. I was pitching various outlets to try and get this to more eyeballs. Newsweek signed on to that story. We were supposed to publish it right before the to 2018 midterms, which was when Whitmer was elected. Literally a week before we we're going to publish it, they tell me, yeah, we don't think there's enough data. I said, what? I've knocked on 400 doors and we have 35 residents on the record. When's the last time anyone in Newsweek knocked on 3 doors?
Yeah.
They basically been cheated. And this isn't just in Flint, by the way. There's other cities, Philadelphia, DC, New York, where water departments have been caught manipulating testing, not just for lead, for other things, because it's within their interest to minimize the levels. Because if the lead levels or other things that are tested in water go above a certain threshold, then you have to spend money to remediate the problem.
Yeah. Fair. Let's you talked about the federal response and the unwillingness to declare a state of emergency, but like there was some federal help, but I mean, like something that really comes out in a in a really powerful way here is that, I mean, it was just like ludicrously inadequate, like both towards the scale of the problem, right? How much money was set aside for Flint, and then in the way that the money was spent, some of which was like pretty shocking, right? Like this is like when you consider that the water switch was something that Flint didn't decide to do for itself, it was forced on it by the state, and that in the course of it, as a result of that, they ended up borrowing some money for the state, and some of the money that was allocated for Flint after all of this happened literally ended up being cycled back into repaying that debt to the state.
Yeah, it's really just sickening. So, and by the way, this isn't just a Flint issue. I think a lot of people don't realize, for example, during the beginning of COVID, Democrats were pushing for more money to go to state and local municipalities. I mean, buyer beware. A lot of times when money is earmarked to go to certain cities, a lot of that money is going to special interests and nonprofits and NGOs, and they're not actually going to what it was specifically earmarked to. So in the case of Flint, I see on Twitter sometimes people will say, oh, you're being dramatic. Congress gave Flint $170 million. Well, I mean, I've spoken with politicians in Michigan and Flint. I've spoken with residents. I've spoken with, I've seen like the receipts of where this money went. First off, the money from Congress first went to the state. So the very entity, Governor Snyder, that covered up this whole thing and let people drink toxic water was handed $170 million and trusted to disperse it to Flint. This was described to me by Flint residents as essentially our rapist handling the rape kit.
Right.
I mean, why would you? I mean, I guess by law it has to go through the state, but I mean, there was no oversight. Snyder was just trusted to give this money to Flint. And in the documentary, you'll hear the mayor, when this was going on, said, I mean, that money was sent to all sorts of other places, like banks, local banks got money, financial firms, law firms, real estate developers. I mean, a whole racket was getting that money other than Flint, Michigan. 50 million of it went to a short-term Medicaid expansion, but that was for kids under 21. I mean, that was good, but they kind of left the rest of the residents, because everyone got sick, not just kids. And then essentially, like Snyder spent some of it to repay the state back for a loan that it gave to Flint to fix the water plant after the Flint River switch. Like a resident says, they could have just forgiven the loan, given the circumstances. So basically, long story short, I'd say maybe 10 to 20 million of $170 million actually went to capital W water relief. most of the rest of it went to special interest and, was handed out like candy to everybody but the residents of Flint. And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, I was just in Flint. I'm talking to parents. I mean, it is staggering the issues children are having now, because lead causes permanent brain damage. You would think that, they had world-class tutors in Flint and world-class special ed and world-class services, given what happened to these children. I mean, I'm talking to parents that have no idea where to turn. They can't get their kids the care they need for learning disabilities that they didn't have. Autism is on the rise. Volatile mood behaviors. I mean, research has shown heavy metal poisoning, lead, increases crime because it damages your brain and makes you act impulsively. And, so there's just not enough services for teenagers and young adults who were basically kids when this happened. So yeah, if anyone tells you like, oh, Flint got all this money, all you got to do is go talk to the residents, because they certainly did not get it.
Yeah, I mean, this is, one of the, I mean, maybe next to all of the cancer and, Legionnaire's disease and all of that. I mean, one of the things that was most disturbing in this documentary is, the part about, behavioral effects of lead poisoning and, and what that does to, the murder rate, the suicide rate, that's because literally, when we're talking about, children whose brains are still developing and they get, and they get all this elevated lead, then this fucks with the parts of your brain that are used, to regulate, behavior, impulse control, and, so you probably get elevated rates of antisocial behavior anyway, just because, there are incredibly depressing things going on in people's lives, but, also just, a lot of, people who are growing up under these conditions and with the effects of this water, are vastly more likely to hurt somebody else, hurt themselves, end up in jail. And there's some really harrowing things in here where, you talk to like a mother, say their child was, was like a, A, B student, who would like, get on her about, needing to get home and do their homework and whatever. And then after the effects of this exposure, I mean, they have trouble focusing, for 5 minutes straight, cause even that, becomes a problem because the cognitive effects of this.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's basically, I think all of us, kids or not, these days, we're just being attacked by information and content, and from podcasts to TikToks to everything. I mean, there's research showing that people's attention span are getting shorted, particularly children, but that's, societal. We're talking like a heavy metal, toxic substances that attack your brain in the most crucial years of development. So, one mother, her kid was a normal kid, social, girls liked him. Now he doesn't leave his room and he's agoraphobic. He's like afraid to leave the house and has suicidal thoughts. Her other son, I felt so bad for her because for all intents and purposes, she's lost both of her sons. One is 25, but won't leave his room and is suicidal. And he was perfectly normal before the water switch. Her other son, I mean, was 11 when this happened. Lovable kid, used to help the elderly neighbor, go grocery shopping because she was disabled, take her garbage out, just a nice, generous kid. This really fucked him up. I mean, he became volatile, had some problems with crime, got a gun and, shot it. Not at a school, not like a mass shooting, but just got in an altercation. And she described that one day she was in the hospital with her daughter, finding out that her daughter was pregnant, and she got a text with a news article that her son had killed someone, and shot and killed one person, and almost killed another person. And obviously you can't defend that, but the criminal justice system does not have a lot of sympathy or lenience for many Black people or poor people. But in this case, there was no thought or lenience given in terms of sentencing to her son, given the fact that he was poisoned by the water, and he'll be in jail for 40 years. Obviously, you can't, you cannot defend shooting someone, but there are extenuating circumstances, and it's just there's a domino effect from this. That's why the word crisis has become so. When the media stops covering something and we all just move on to whatever's currently going on, it's hard to remember what happened yesterday, let alone 10 years ago. But when you're poisoned, it's not only you see the long lines waiting for water and it's an emergency then, but the domino effect goes on for literally, decades. I mean, I believe this is kind of a lost generation in Flint for kids who are now teens and young adults. It's, lead poisoning it's permanent. There's nothing you could do to reverse it. All you could do is kind of cope. So lost income of children that will never be what maybe they could have been. With women, there's been very, very high amounts of miscarriages in Flint. I
remember at one point in the documentary, somebody pointed out, lots of women who, are afraid to have kids now, right? Because they don't know, they don't know what they might be passing on.
Yeah. And also, I mean, the truth is, to this day, this is why I say it's a crisis, actively going on. I mean, the water is still junk. So Flint has a 35% poverty rate. Most people cannot afford to go buy, 10 cases of bottled water per month. That's expensive. So almost 20% of Flint doesn't have transportation. So they just use the tap water. They have a Brita filter that the state provided, but contrary to what the state says, that does not filter out lead completely. And those filters go bad very quickly. They also breed bacteria. So you're kind of you might be reducing lead a little bit, but they create bacteria issues. So basically the residents have been, and a lot of people say, well, if it were me, I'd move. Well, you think you're going to have a long line waiting around the block to buy your home in Flint? Because most people don't. Their home value has taken a nosedive. Their infrastructure in their home is damaged. They can't leave. Somebody in the documentary who was really powerful said it's like, lighting a warehouse on fire and then locking the doors so the people can't get out. I mean, that's kind of what this is.
Yeah. I mean, the very thing that made it easier to do this to this city, that the poverty rate, all that that gives people less sway and makes it possible to take away the right to self-governance, that makes it easier to ignore it later, also makes it much harder for people to just leave, right? And go somewhere else. Cause I mean, as you're, you're surely eating the cost of the home that you lived in Flint, if you tried to move now. I mean, this is really the kind of, story that is, I mean, you've brought up a few times in the conversation, the sort of significant, the larger significance beyond Flint of what happened and what is still happening in Flint. And I mean, this really, seems like not just in the immediate sense with the emergency manager law and all that caused this to happen in the first place, but, in a much larger sense. I mean, this seems like a story about, the holes in American democracy, such as it is, and this is also, I mean, you mentioned the derailment in East Palestine a couple times, and I mean, I remember thinking at the time that it was pretty remarkable, that within a few weeks you had the Silicon Valley Bank collapse and the East Palestine derailment, and we, saw who there was more urgency, about helping in that pairing, right? And this is just like that it's just kind of staggering to think about it. I mean, maybe if you want to kind of close out on this, reflecting on this, that the state of American democracy right now is such that you can have an entire, sizable city full of people who are just, this obviously so far down the priority list that, the systems that we have in place will let this happen to them.
Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, people, it's funny, people have complained to me, Jordan, I appreciate what you're doing in Flint, but there's a lot of other Flints. Go cover other things. I'm like, well, I'm not an octopus. I can't, spread my tentacles, but I have covered a whole lot of other issues. This isn't just an issue of democracy. This is an issue of capitalism, folks, because let me tell you, there's water problems, there's air problems, there's soil problems all over this country. I don't say this to be dramatic. If you're watching, there's probably something going on in your city and you don't know about it. I mean, I was just in coal country, West Virginia. Yes, they voted for Trump. If you want, you could say, you get what you deserve, but, I view it as people are people. And literally, it's coal country. The coal companies own the government. They own Manchin. They own literally the governor is a coal baron in West Virginia, and the coal miners breached the aquifer in Wyoming County, which is southern West Virginia, and for over a year, well water has been coming out contaminated with mining fluid. When I was there, some of the water, I saw water that literally had a green fungus growing in it. I met residents. I literally, wherever you go, like the creeks, residents' backyards, it smells like rotten eggs is an understatement, times 10. And this is happening out in the open. And literally residents for over a year have been all going to the doctor with the same diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, headaches. I talked to a nurse who was afraid for her job, so I, kind of blurted out and covered their identity. But I mean, she was saying literally she's seen maybe an influx, tenfold of patients all with the same symptoms, and now people are mysteriously dying of cancers. And Manchin, no answer. The governor of justice, no answer. The environmental department of West Virginia, our testing shows everything's fine. I mean, I'm literally with the residents. I'm seeing with my eyes their rashes. I'm smelling the water. I'm seeing things that look like fungus, look like white stringy particles. So that's in West Virginia. I've covered water problems in North Carolina, in Indiana, in Chicago. I mean, I could go down the list. There's so many environmental problems in this country because the truth is, for all the great that the industrial boom of America did, we didn't have an EPA till the 1970s, folks. And there wasn't a lot of thought during this industrial boom, specifically in the Rust Belt, of how it was going to affect the environment. So you got, I mean, technically in 2008, we had regulations for financial banks. They just weren't enforced. It's the same thing in the environmental sector. We have regulations. There's just not, I mean, literally after Norfolk Southern, a multi-billion-dollar railroad company, chemically nuked this small town in East Palestine, Norfolk Southern was put in control of the response. Think about that. The EPA was literally there, and Norfolk Southern was running the response. So I could go on forever, but the point is, Erin Brockovich, not to name drop, but she has told me this over and over. Superman ain't coming. The rescue choppers are not coming. It's up to the people. That's why, residents in Flint have had to become, mini water experts and chemical experts and network with, residents in other communities like Love Canal and other places where stuff like this has happened. But unfortunately, it is the politicians. They are representing the banks. They are representing the corporations, the railroads. They're not representing you. And unfortunately, whether it's Flint or other places, in many cases, it's privatization schemes or corporate malfeasance or corporate pollution that is causing these problems. And the politicians, unfortunately, are not making the corporations clean it up. They're basically just leaving you to suffer.
Yeah, I mean, I'd argue the democracy issue and the capitalism issue are the same issue, sort of put in two different ways. But yeah, your mention of Aaron Brockovich reminds me that I should mention you have a book coming out with a forward buyer, We the Poisoned, exposing the Flint water crisis cover up and the poisoning of 100,000 Americans. When is this coming out?
Yeah, it'll be out in August. I kicked and screamed to get them to publish it sooner because the actual anniversary was in April, but it'll be out in August. I'm really excited. This is basically 8 years of reporting. And it's tough as a reporter when you just have a mountain of facts to put it down in a way that's compelling and entertaining and all that. But, few people I trust, I've shown it to, and I mean, they were just stunned. I mean, that's the reaction I get all the time. I mean, from even my parents who are right wingers. Their response is like, why is CNN and other outlets not covered? Why is Fox, which they watch Fox, how is this not being covered? And I say, it's a great question. But the book has, in my view, this has been, I believe this makes like The Sopranos, or think of like the worst kind of criminal stuff you could think of. It makes that look like child's play. I mean, this is so corrupt and rotten. And it really starts in the 2000s, like kind of take you from before the water switch all the way to today. There's a lot of villains, there's payoffs, there's destruction of evidence, there's people's tires being, brakes being cut, residents being threatened. I mean, it's just a whole lot of stuff, about Snyder, but also a lot of stuff about the Democrats, dropping the ball. So, that'll be out in August. Hopefully I could join you then to talk about that.
Please do come back when the book's coming out. Thank you so much. Anybody who wants to watch the documentary, we've got the link in the show notes for the Breaking Points link where you can watch the whole thing. You've also been doing screenings, right?
Yeah, we did one in Flint, which was really cool. And we have a website for the documentary too. So that's flintfatigue.com.
All right. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Thanks, man.
All right. That was Jordan Chariton of Status Coup, and who is, I think, has been doing really important work in covering what's been going on for the last decade in my home state. And I think is really, obviously most, political media, ends up mostly being focused on things that matter, much less than this does. But, this is, really, really glad we could have that conversation. Do watch that movie, not after you've eaten, but yeah. So switching gears a little bit, want to say as we close, move into the last segment of the main show, I should say change of plans. Our post-game guest had to reschedule. He will be joining us sometime soon. I don't know if we have a new date quite yet, but we'll figure that out soon. And of course, our intrepid friend Jake has to be gone tonight, so we are going to go post-gameless tonight. But there are just a couple more things that I want to do in the main show. One of those is I did while I was gone, this trip that I just got back from. One of the things I did was give the keynote talk at the state convention of the Green Party of New Jersey. So we do have that video. It's not very long, so we're going to play that during the last chunk of the post game, or of the main show rather.
Green Horizon has chronicled the ups and downs of the movement in our state and nationally. Production of the magazine was sustained for 20 years because you probably all have heard my co-editor John Resenbrink over the years talk at one or another Green convention, but John, as you know, died 2 years ago. And the funding has been kind of drying up for Green Horizon. So next year, I'm going to transition into helping produce a new national periodical, working with Howie Logan and others. An aspiration will be to do for the green politics movement what Jacobin magazine has done for the democratic socialist movement over the last 10 years. It's been outstanding. I don't know how many of you read Jacobin, but I read it all the time online. And we're fortunate today to have one of the most prominent columnists of Jacobin as our keynote speaker. Ben Burgess is an adjunct philosophy professor at Rutgers and also the host of the YouTube podcast, Give Them an Argument. But many of us have primarily been influenced by his articles in Jacobin, which are often relevant to our Green Party work. For example, a couple of weeks ago, his article was titled, Democratic Party Voters Are Furious About U.S. Support for Israel, where he discussed the uncommitted vote movement. Last week, his article was, Pro-Palestine protesters are on the right side of history. And this week, his article is titled, Freedom Under Capitalism Isn't All It's Cracked Up to Be, in which he critiques libertarianism, our ideological rival in the third party activist space. So I'm pleased to present our friend and movement comrade, Ben Burgess.
Thanks, Steve. Let's pop this up a little bit. Please do this. All right, this works. First things first, I want to thank you guys for the kind invitation to come speak to you, and Steve in particular for setting this up. I got the sense in my correspondence with him that part of what caused attention was a couple of things that I've written for Jacobin about the upcoming election. In particular, a couple of articles where I hammered home the point that as little as I may want Donald Trump to return to the White House, if Joe Biden loses the election this November because crucial constituencies he needs to win are discussed with the atrocities in Gaza, then the single person who deserves the most blame for that outcome is Joe Biden. It's the job of politicians to appeal to voters, and all of these liberal pundits raging at voters because they refuse to overlook the mountain of corpses in Gaza made me think of Bertolt Brecht's poem, Die Lösung. He wrote it after the defeat of the general strike and uprising in East Berlin in 1953. We had the Stalinist ruling party put up posters around the city saying that to earn back the trust of the party, people would have to work twice as hard. Would it not be simpler, Brecht asks at the end of the poem, for the government to simply dissolve the people and elect another? But of course, how do you tell any of you that it's Biden's fault if he chooses Benjamin Netanyahu over his own base and loses a winnable election? A Green Party meeting is probably the single audience that least needs to hear that. And I don't want to spend my time with you telling you things that you already know. Nor do I think it's particularly useful, to spend it exploring any agreements or disagreements that I may have with you all on questions of electoral strategy. I suspect just about everybody in this room spends more time than I do thinking about electoral strategy. And again, I simply don't want to waste your time. Instead, if you'll indulge me, I want to invite you, comrades, to think with me about a slightly different question. Not a question about means, but a question about ends. Because when we talk about Biden's involvement in proxy wars in the Middle East or Eastern Europe, or the grotesque crackdown he's supporting on students who are taking a stand against genocide on college campuses, I just did a teach-in at Princeton yesterday, and I'm genuinely furious to see the way that these students are being smeared. Or when we talk about the urgent need for action on climate change, or when we have any number of similar conversations, what we're really talking about is opposing each new horrible thing when it happens. And of course, those things do need to be opposed, no question. But I worry that we can't build the kind of forces we need to oppose them. And when I say we here, I'm talking about the big lefty we. Everyone from comrades like you guys who are pursuing electoral efforts outside of the two-party system, to comrades in the DSA who are pursuing a different electoral strategy, to the people in those encampments and other efforts that have very little to do with electoral politics one way or the other, all of us. I worry that we won't be able to build up the kinds of cadres we need to get this job done in the long term if we're only reacting to the worst of what's going on right now. If we're just in this kind of eternal defensive posture. I worry about the effects of burnout and demoralization if we're endlessly playing whack-a-mole with each fresh war and we're not driven by a vision of the world that we actually want. If you think back to the best things that happened in the 20th century, like the labor movement that gave so many people I grew up with around in Michigan a chance at a decent life, or the civil rights movement that ended the moral abomination of de jure racial apartheid in Jim Crow states, or the peace movement that helped end the war in Vietnam. A lot of the people who fought the hardest in the trenches of those movements were socialists and communists who held in their heads a vision for the world that would be totally different than the one we live in right now. That's what kept them going. Mainstream narratives tend to erase them from this history, but these comrades made up a huge part of the background of those movements. And in many cases, when you actually interrogate the specific vision that they held, they thought societies like the Soviet Union or Mao's China represented a viable and desirable alternative to the inequities of the status quo, which was a tragic mistake. We can acknowledge that it was a tragic mistake without portraying those societies that I just mentioned as black and white stories of pure monstrosity. We can don't have to represent them as being like Narnia before Aslan, always winter and never Christmas. And we can acknowledge that there were complex societies that did some things right, and that the free market shock therapy that was applied to many of them starting in the 90s was a giant step backwards. But if we're talking about models of the future that we can get people excited about, we can potentially one day win a majority of the population supporting, we obviously need to do better than to point to the deeply flawed experiments that happened in the 20th century. So here's the question. What do we want? What exactly do we want? Let's say that you could just ask a magical genie to make Bernie Sanders president, or Jill Stein president, or one of those people that we just watched in the Zoom. Noam Chomsky, take your pick. Replace the 535 members of the House and Senate, 535 leftists of your choice. Replace the 9 members of the Supreme Court with 9 of the comrades in this room. If you're imagining that scenario, while you're at it, throw in workers' organizations and people's organizations, the grassroots of society that would be powerful enough to beat back the inevitable attempt by wealthy invested interests to block this government I'm describing from doing what it wanted. If you just help yourself to all of that, what would you actually want that government to do? And before I lay out, my own tentative answers to that question, and then invite you comrades to think about it with me in the Q&A, I want to say a word about why I think it's an important question for us to think about, because it might just seem like a silly waste of time. I'm certainly under zero illusions that the situation I described is likely to come up in the near future. But I think we need an answer because first, I very badly want to believe that there's a better long-term future waiting for us if we can figure out how to implement it. I desperately need to believe that. And second, I think without some kind of vision like that to animate the most dedicated cadres for our movements going forward, I don't believe that we'll be able to achieve reforms on the scale of our predecessors who successfully fought to do things like create collective bargaining and end segregation, never mind creating an entirely new kind of society. History is often very surprising to those who live through it, and I'm sure if we're lucky enough to get to that better society, it won't turn out exactly the way we might predict from the vantage point of 2024, but even so, we need to have some kind of vision of where we want to go to sustain the journey. So again, President Chomsky, 9 of the people in this room in the Supreme Court, wherever you like filling those 535 House and Senate seats, where does that get us? What do we do? Some of it's obvious. Do Medicare for all to end the obscenity of our for-profit healthcare system. We stop shipping 2,000-pound bombs to Israel to drop on children in refugee camps. But then what? Because presumably we don't just want to end those particular horrors and turn America into like a version of Canada with a more dovish foreign policy. Because a more dovish Canada is a fine thing to be. It'd be a nice step from where we are now. But please don't tell me that's the big long-term dream that's supposed to sustain us going forward. Right now, two basic things are true, and they'll be true even if we all had healthcare, and even if we ended some of the current wars. I want to emphasize them just to help us to dream big. One is that we live under capitalism, which is a way of saying that some people own their own businesses, but the overwhelming majority of human beings who are directly involved in the economy have very little autonomy during the hours of the day that they spend making their living. And downstream of that basic inequity in ownership, relations, and economic power, there's an absolutely grotesquely unequal distribution of resources. Some people sleep under bridges and highway overpasses, and some people have private planes, and some people take private space flights, and most people worry about how to handle a $700 emergency. That's obscene. The other thing is that the United States is the reigning imperial hegemon in a global system of domination that takes economic and diplomatic forms, but at its core is the American global projection military force that no one else can rival. That's a kind of system too, a global system of wildly unequal power that generates abominations like decades-long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, like the drone war, like what's going on in Gaza right now, as most of the world looks on in imminent war. I'm pointing to these two basic facts about our fundamental economic structure and our fundamental global geopolitical structure to encourage everyone here to think about what it would even look like for those two things not to be true. The late analytical Marxist sociologist Eric Wright wrote a book everyone should read called Envisioning Real Utopias. And he says there that we need to ask three questions about our vision of a better society. First, we need a vision that's desirable. That is, if we can figure out how we implement it, it would at least be better than what we have right now. It's a low bar, but that's where we start. Second, we need that vision to be viable, meaning that we know how to implement it without recreating the empty grocery store shelves of East Germany or just collapsing back into what we already have right now. Finally, it needs to be achievable, meaning that there's a realistic scenario in which we could win over a democratic majority of the population to our ideas and actually achieve it. So, to start to think about this analytically, an example of a proposal for social change that might be desirable and in some way, viable, but probably would be trying to target racially disparate patterns of poverty with sort of ancestry-based schemes for reparations for slavery. It's very difficult to see how we win over the overwhelming majority of the population that we would need to enact a major distribution of wealth if the major distribution of wealth didn't actually benefit the majority of the population, whereas it's much easier to see how you can win over that overwhelming majority to universalistic ideas about economic distribution, which would help everybody, although of course disproportionately they would help descendants of slaves because of those very disproportionate patterns of the distribution of power. So I want to hear your ideas about this stuff in the Q&A, but first I'll just briefly put my own cards on the table. On foreign policy, on that second question that I was pointing to earlier, beyond winding down the current wars, I think we need to think much harder about how to build kind of multinational institutions that could conceivably be powerful enough to constrain the actions of even the most powerful countries like Russia, China, but of course most of all, the United States. I want to negotiate the de-escalation of Ukraine, for example, because I think that's the least possible, least awful outcome that I could imagine under present circumstances. But ultimately, I would like a global system where somebody like Putin would worry that if he initiated a war without justification, then he would end up being hauled before the International Criminal Court in The Hague. And I would want a global system where an American president would worry that if they did something like invade Iraq or send 2,000-pound bombs to Israel but to drop on refugee camps, they would end up sharing that jail cell. Now, right now we can barely even imagine what functional global institutions that had teeth like that would or could even look like. It's so far from where we are right now. Never mind the steps that would take us from here to there. I do know, for example, that a good baby step in that direction would be repealing the absurd law on books right now in the United States that commits us to engage in military action, not making this up, to rescue any American military officers who find themselves on trial before the International Criminal Court. That sounds made up, but it's not. Act, but it's officially called the American Service Members Protection Act. It was passed in 2002. On the economic front, what we think very hard about is what Alex Nove called feasible socialism. What that means is some form of socialism that would do away with all the worst things about the capitalist status quo. Not all of them, I'm sure, no system does away with all of them, but a whole bunch of them, I would hope. But would it generate the kind of economic dysfunctionality on the other end that would breed so much discontent that either capitalism would be restored the way it ultimately was in the USSR, or you would need some sort of severe political authoritarianism to stop that from happening, which the Soviet experience shows is just a stopgap anyway. If half of our reason for hating capitalism is that democracy stops at the gauge of the workplace, then we need an economically viable vision of socialism so that it can be an expansion of democracy, not a contraction. I think my friend Bhaskar Sunkara has some plausible things to say about that. In the first chapter of his book, The Socialist Manifesto, it's called The Day in the Life of a Socialist Citizen. I think the philosopher David Schweikart had some plausible things to say about in his books, After Capitalism. The bad news, if you read these thinkers, is that we probably don't know yet how to do without markets entirely. Maybe one day AI will advance the point that we can have, fully automated luxury communism. But I don't want to have to wait for that to start envisioning a post-capitalist future. I want a vision that we could, at least in principle, implement tomorrow, even if God only knows when we get there in the real world. So I think we probably do need market mechanisms in some parts of the economy for the foreseeable future, but for sure, we know we can centrally plan sectors like healthcare and education outside of that, because the experience of actually existing social democracy around the world is pretty definitive on that. Canada exists. You can drive up and verify for yourself. And I think thinkers like Sunkara and Schweikart have ideas that are worth exploring about how, if we need market mechanisms in some parts of the economy, at least the firms in those parts of the economy could be internally democratic worker-owned firms. And instead of private investment, the funds for new firms could come from state-owned banks. And I know that once you start talking about firm structure and how investment capital is seeded, this can start to feel very dry, very unexciting, but it shouldn't. Honestly, this stuff excites me because it's a vision that I can just about imagine actually happening. I can just about imagine a timeline where we actually do eventually get there. Achieve it in a process that sure might have to include moments of dramatic rupture, general strikes, factory occupations, things like that. But I can imagine actually electing left-wing politicians and having them do things that start to get us in that direction. Think, for example, about Jeremy Corbyn's proposal several years ago that firms that are about to relocate out of the country or go out of business, the workers themselves be given right of first refusal to buy up the firm with government-seeded funds. That's something that I think if you explain it to most normies, they'll say, oh yeah, that sounds good, right? People who are about to get now laid off have a chance at keeping their jobs and, seeing if they can run the place themselves. And again, at least points in the direction of that better economy that I'm talking about. And ultimately, I guess the stuff excites me because these are the kind of ideas, this and the foreign policy ones we're talking about, that at least give me some kind of glimpse of what something qualitatively better than the current American system and the current global system might look like. And I think we desperately need a vision like that if we're going to sustain ourselves in the current game of whack-a-mole and not burn out as we see horde upon horde pile up all around us. And with that, I'd like to hear from you guys. All right. So I also actually the day after I got back, I did the Munk debates, MUNK. They hosted a debate. We did it online. They'll put it out audio only. Between me and Jamie Kirchik, who used to work for the New Republic, on the resolved the campus protests around the right side of history. So with any luck, we'll have that for you as part of next week's show. I will also, I guess, say that was originally going to be a debate with Jonah Goldberg, and Jonah said he realized that he was busy. So, who knows? But, Mr. Goldberg, if you ever want to, reschedule outside of Monk's auspices, the door is open. So I'll just say that. But in any case, so while we are wrapping up, I also know we have so we have this from Andy. You want to give us the context for this?
Yeah, so I mentioned the post game last week that I was part of the Pride March with my local DSA and marched for Gaza, marched for the Palestinians, and spent the entire time chanting, Genocide Joe, and from the river to the sea. It was a lot of fun. And the wonderful thing about it is that the crowds warmly welcomed us. Like there was cheering, from most corners. I would have to say. I think I saw one person purposely stood with their back to us, but I think outside of that, there was a lot of signs that actually, said, I'm gay and I'm for a free Palestine kind of stuff in the crowd. So I thought that was great. So it was just an absolute wonderful experience. And that is both my DSA and the Berkshire's DSA, who was part of the march. So that was a picture we took after the march.
Yeah, I know this is the kind of thing that there's this talking point that a lot of people seem to be very proud of themselves for, which is, oh, how could you possibly be gay and for Palestine? Because Hamas, kills gay people or you're out of the closet and all this stuff. And it's like, always strikes me as this massive non sequitur.
Well, not only that, like just to put it on the surface, this weekend, Eurovision happened.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Eurovision, and Israel competed, which they got booed.
Yep.
Was a wonderful thing to see. But I did not actually watch that Eurovision. I just saw some clips from it. And of course, Windows 95 man. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up on YouTube. Thank me later. But the one thing, they had Israel had a non-binary performer, and they misgendered their performer, and I think might have dead named them if I remember correctly. But I know they definitely misgendered them. So like Israel's not this bastion of liberal gay rights that they're making it out.
I mean, certainly not. I mean, there's no same-sex marriage in Israel, but I mean, you could make the point, which is fair enough as far as it goes, that it's still much more liberal on that than Hamas. But like, again, it just seems like a huge non sequitur to me, because you can search the pronouncements of Netanyahu and Ben Gvir in vain for any indication that they even pretend that they're like fighting to impose social liberalism on people in Gaza, right? That has nothing to do with anything. They've never made the slightest attempt to do that in a Palestinian territory or to make life better for any gay person there. And I would, obviously, I always, sort of say, half jokingly, just because I think it plays up the absurdity of all the do you condemn Hamas stuff, that obviously people would not have my vote if I could somehow vote in a Palestinian election, but obviously I would hope for vastly more progressive forces to win out, in the future. But meanwhile, I think what would be really nice for people in Gaza, closeted gay people or otherwise, is to not die and not have their children die. And that really seems like that should be the priority at the moment. I also think, by the way, I also say on Eurovision, I mean, it's like, you could say, okay, it's not the performer's fault, that the policies of their government, etc. And I'm actually sympathetic to that. But the problem is that Eurovision does make decisions all the time that are geopolitical decisions about who gets to participate and who doesn't, right? So, bring the Russians back in Eurovision, right? And then we can just say, hey, everybody, this has nothing to do with politics, whatever. But of course, you can't really have that both ways. Before we close out, if I could find it, I just did want to do the very last question in the Q&A. Let me see if I can grab this. In some kind of successful way. A lot of that is about sort of down our throat every single day. Yep. Here we go. All right. 26. A problem on the left. All right. So this thought that this would be a good one to close out on. By the way, see the Soviet Union discussion in the chat. My 2 cents would be that you can think it's a really good thing that the Soviet Union won World War II and a really bad thing that they invaded Czechoslovakia. We can walk and chew bubblegum on that. But in any case, I think just as a last bit of sound to close out the episode, just thought we would do the very last question and answer in the Q&A after the talk in New Jersey. I should say, so yeah, no post game tonight, but we'll be back on Thursday. Of course, we'll do the debate breakdown. We're going to finish watching the sexual revolution debate, the one with Grimes and everybody that sounds like somebody's describing their dream, with producer Jordan and Varn and Deep State Cuba. Then we'll be back on Monday, probably with Matt McManus to talk Tucker Dugan, but we might switch that up a little bit. We might have to switch up the order of episodes a little bit. We'll figure that out. Maybe add another guest, but in any case, we'll figure all that out when we come to it. But no post game tonight. A lot of good stuff coming up. And yeah, let's close out the episode with this last bit of the Q&A.
Has to do with, in a sense, quote unquote infrastructure, where our message is stepped on over and over and over again, because those that are reporting the message, if you will, are owned by ones who are suppressing the people themselves. And my question to you is, what step do you think we could take so that the message of the rest of us, the rest of a large portion of the country, can be heard, as opposed to the corporate message that we get stuffed down our throat every single day? Okay, because there are certain things, my personal belief, there are certain human rights that people have: a roof over your head, food on the table, the right to believe whatever you want to believe, etc., and live your lifestyle the way you want to live. And all of those under capitalism are squashed. I just wanted to ask you about that.
Sure. So I have two versions of the answer to this. There's a 3-word version, and there's the slightly longer version. So the slightly longer version is that I think in the past, when the kind of issue that you're talking about has been at least partially overcome in some kind of successful way, a lot of that is about sort of the kind of organizations in workplaces and communities that can do person-to-person messaging rather than everybody all at once. And I think the importance of that really can't be overstated, right? I think it's too easy. Everybody here is already several steps past most people who share their opinions, because they're actually doing things like going to meetings in physical space, and sadly most people who agree with all of us on all those issues that I just mentioned aren't doing right now, right? And I think that if you have, like I was sort of alluding to at the beginning of the talk, workers' organizations, people's organizations that can spread that kind of person-to-person messaging, I think there's really no substitute for that. That said, especially if this is the last question, I've got to give my 3-word answer too. So you asked, how do we overcome the domination of corporate media, and all the propaganda we're seeing, right? I just had a wonderful discussion yesterday when I did that teach-in with a bunch of very earnest Princeton students, lots of whom were Jewish, none of whom seemed to love Hamas. You would not know these things from cable news. And it was wonderful. And the disconnect between that and what you see on there is horrifying, right? The way these people are being demonized. So, as I said, I think the more complicated and fuller answer to how do we overcome that problem is the one I just gave. But I feel duty bound to give the 3-word answer, which is subscribe to Jacobin.